The sound of an impact wrench echoed through the garage as Wyatt Olsen wiped the grease off his hands, his shirt already stained with oil from a long day of work. He was 24, quick with his hands, and even quicker with his temper when it came to unfairness. Across the shop, a silver sedan sat unmoving, its hood propped open. An elderly man, probably in his 70s, stood beside it, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched a worn leather wallet. His clothes were clean but old, his shoes scuffed from years of wear. I just need the belt replaced," the man said, his voice quiet but firm. "I know it's not a big job, I can pay some of it today and the rest next week." The manager, a stocky man named Rick, leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "That's not how this works, old man, we ain't a charity. Pay in full or take your car somewhere else." Wyatt, who had been listening from the bay, tightened his jaw. He had worked here for 3 years, long enough to know Rick wasn't the type to bend, but this wasn't right. Before he could stop himself, Wyatt stepped forward, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'll do it." The old man turned, surprised. "Son, I don't want you to get in trouble." Wyatt shook his head. "It's a 15-minute job, don't worry about it." Rick's face darkened. "Wyatt, don't be stupid. You do this for free, you're paying for the part out of your own check." Wyatt didn't flinch. "Fine, take it out of my check." Rick scoffed but didn't stop him. He knew Wyatt was stubborn and frankly, he didn't care enough to argue over a belt. As Wyatt got to work, a man in a faded mechanic's uniform watched from the waiting area. He was tall, with streaks of gray in his beard, his face worn by time but sharp. Nobody knew him, just another new hire, another trainee trying to get his hands dirty. Except he wasn't. That man was the owner of the entire 6-location auto repair chain. His name was Wesley Owens, and he had spent the last 10 years running this company from a distance. He had bought it from an old friend, trusting that the business would run itself. But recently, complaints had started rolling in. Bad service, overpriced repairs, employees quitting without warning, so Wesley did what he had never done before he went undercover. Nobody here recognized him. Most of his employees had never met him in person. To them, he was just another corporate name on their paychecks. And now, sitting in the waiting area, he watched as one of his best mechanics, did the right thing, even when it cost him. Wyatt worked fast, his fingers moving with practiced ease. The belt was replaced in minutes. When he was done, he wiped his hands and turned to the old man. "You're good to go." The elderly man looked at him, eyes misty. "Son, you didn't have to do that." Wyatt shrugged. "Yeah, I did." The old man reached into his pocket, pulling out a crumpled $5 bill. "I know it's not much," but Wyatt shook his head, pushing the money back. "Just drive safe, all right." The old man hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." As he drove off, Wesley leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms. He had seen enough. This wasn't just about one act of kindness. It was about the kind of culture that had been allowed to take root in his shops, and he wasn't going to ignore it. Wesley stayed quiet as the day moved on, blending into the background like any other trainee. He listened, observed, and took mental notes of everything happening around him. The way Rick barked orders but barely lifted a finger, the way the younger mechanics hustled to keep up, the way customers hesitated before approving repairs, something about the atmosphere in this place felt off. By late afternoon, a woman in her mid-30s pulled her SUV into the bay. She stepped out, holding her keys tightly, looking uneasy. Wyatt wiped his hands on a rag and stepped forward before anyone else could. "Something wrong with the car?" he asked, keeping his tone light. She hesitated. "It's making a weird noise when I turn." "I just need a quick check." Before Wyatt could respond, Rick appeared behind him. "Inspection's gonna be $80, lady, non-refundable." Her eyes widened. $80 just to look at it," Rick shrugged. "That's shop policy?" Wyatt frowned but didn't say anything yet. The woman looked flustered, clearly debating whether she could afford it. Wesley, watching from the side, felt his jaw tighten. She started, then sighed. "All right, I need to know what's wrong." Rick motioned for Wyatt to take care of it, then walked off without another word. Wyatt opened the hood, listening for the sound as he turned the wheel back and forth. After a few minutes, he stepped out. "Your power steering fluid's low, that's what's causing the noise." The woman let out a relieved breath. "Oh, that's all." "Yeah," Wyatt said. "I can top it off for you right now. Shouldn't take more than a minute." Before he could grab the fluid, Rick's voice cut in. "That'll be a full power steering flush, $150. Wyatt turned sharply. "She doesn't need a full flush. Just a top off." "That's not your call," Rick said, crossing his arms. "We charge for the full service or we don't do it at all." The woman looked between them, clearly uncomfortable. Wesley caught the way Wyatt's hands clenched at his sides. "I can't afford that," she admitted. "Isn't there any way?" Rick cut her off. "No discounts. You want the car fixed, you pay the price." Wyatt exhaled through his nose, visibly holding himself back. He turned to the woman. "Go to the auto parts store down the street, buy a bottle of power steering fluid. It'll cost you like $5. You can pour it in yourself." Rick's face darkened. "Are you serious right now?" Wyatt didn't even look at him. "That's all you need," he told the woman. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She gave him a grateful look, then quickly left. As soon as she was gone, Rick turned on Wyatt. "You trying to cost us money?" "I'm trying to be honest," Wyatt shot back. Rick scoffed. "Honest doesn't pay the bills." "It should," Wyatt muttered. Rick stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You keep pulling stunts like that, you won't be working here much longer." Wyatt held his ground, but Wesley could see the tension in his shoulders. The kid was fighting a battle he shouldn't have had to fight. Wesley had seen enough. The way Rick operated wasn't just bad management, it was outright unethical. Overcharging, pushing unnecessary work, intimidating employees into silence. This wasn't just one bad shop. If Rick was running things this way here, what were the other locations like? Wesley wasn't about to find out the hard way. He stood up, dusted off his hands, and walked toward them. "Something wrong?" he asked casually, keeping his voice level. Rick barely spared him a glance. "Nah, just setting the kid straight." Wyatt looked like he wanted to argue but held back. Wesley could see at the exhaustion of fighting against a system that didn't care. Wesley turned to Wyatt. "You always this honest with customers?" Wyatt hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah," Wesley nodded thoughtfully. "Good," Rick scoffed. "Yeah. And who are you to say what's good?" The corner of Wesley's mouth lifted slightly. "You'll find out soon enough." Rick rolled his eyes and walked off, muttering under his breath. Wyatt watched him go, then turned back to Wesley. "You new here?" Wyatt asked. "Something like that," Wesley said. Wyatt studied him for a moment, then shrugged. "You'll figure it out soon enough." Wesley already had, and he wasn't done yet. The garage fell into a lull as the afternoon stretched on. Wesley stayed in the background, blending in with the other workers, but his mind was already made up. He had seen enough, more than enough. Rick ran this place like a personal cash register, squeezing customers for every dollar while discouraging honesty among his employees. Wyatt, on the other hand, was the kind of worker any business owner should be proud to have. Wesley had no doubt that if this was happening here, it was happening in other locations too. He wasn't going to let that slide. The moment came sooner than expected. A man in a button-down shirt and slacks walked in, glancing around. He had the air of someone who didn't usually frequent mechanic shops, and his expression was tight with frustration. Rick, as usual, took the lead. "Something we can do for you." The man pulled a folded receipt from his pocket and placed it on the counter. "I was in here last week for a brake job. Since then, my car's been making a grinding noise. I brought it to another shop and they said my rotors weren't replaced like I was charged for." Wesley, standing near a tool rack, watched closely. Rick barely looked at the receipt. "That's not possible." "We do all our work by the book." The man's jaw tightened. "They showed me the rotors, they weren't new. I paid over $600 and I want to know what happened." Rick sighed, shaking his head as if dealing with a difficult child. "Look, I don't know what that other shop told you, but we don't cut corners here. Maybe they just wanted your business." Wyatt, who had been tightening a lug nut nearby, stopped what he was doing. His back straightened and he turned slightly, listening. The customer tapped the receipt. I want to see my service records. Rick's expression darkened. That's company information, we don't just hand that out. Wesley had heard enough. He stepped forward, removing the grease-streaked cap he'd been wearing all day. For the first time, he let himself stand like the owner he was. That's a lie. Rick turned sharply. Excuse me? Wesley ignored him and faced the customer instead. You have the right to see your records. If you were charged for new rotors, you should have gotten them. The man looked between them, confused. And who are you? Wesley met his gaze. Wesley Owens, I own this company. The garage went silent. Rick blinked, his posture stiffening. That's not funny. It's not a joke, Wesley said. I've been here all day, watching, listening. He turned to the customer. I'll personally make sure you get a full refund. And I'll be taking a very close look at what happened with your car. The man exhaled, some of his frustration easing. That's all I wanted. Wesley nodded, then turned to Rick. You've got something to say? Rick's bravado flickered. He forced a laugh, but it didn't land. Come on, this is just a misunderstanding. Maybe one of the techs made a mistake. No, Wesley interrupted. This isn't a mistake, it's a pattern. He gestured toward Wyatt. I watched this kid do the right thing today, twice. Meanwhile, you've been running a scam, overcharging customers and threatening employees who don't play along. Rick's expression shifted, his usual confidence slipping. I was just following company policy. Wesley's voice stayed level, but his words cut deep. I write company policy. And what you've been doing, that's not it. Rick's mouth opened, then closed. Wesley let the silence hang for a moment before turning to Wyatt. How long have you been working here? Wyatt hesitated, then answered. 3 years. You ever get a promotion? Wyatt shook his head. Wesley looked back at Rick. And yet, he's the only one here who seems to have any integrity. He turned back to Wyatt. You ever thought about running this place? Wyatt's brow furrowed. What? I need someone who actually cares about customers, cares about doing the job right. Someone who won't let people get ripped off. You up for that? Wyatt glanced around, clearly trying to process what was happening. I mean, yeah, but no, but you've proven yourself. I need people like you in charge. Rick finally found his voice. You can't just fire me on the spot. Wesley met his gaze, unflinching. Yes, I can. Rick opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. Wesley turned back to Wyatt. We'll talk details soon, but for now, go ahead and finish your shift. You've got a shop to run. The young mechanic nodded slowly, still catching up to reality. Wesley looked around at the rest of the employees. Things are changing. If you've been doing your job right, you've got nothing to worry about. But if you've been cutting corners, you won't last long. The message was clear. The silence in the garage wasn't just shock, it was the weight of something shifting. A company that had lost its way was finally being put back on track. And it all started with one honest mechanic who refused to look the other way. By the time the shop closed for the night, the weight of the day still clung to the air. Employees moved with a cautious energy, glancing at Wyatt like he was someone entirely different now. He felt the shift too. Hours ago, he had been just another mechanic trying to do the right thing. Now, he was being handed responsibility he hadn't asked for but wasn't about to turn down. Wesley stayed behind as the garage emptied out, watching as Wyatt locked up tools and wiped down the workbenches. The usual end-of-shift routine felt heavier now, like something permanent had changed. The younger mechanic finally exhaled, resting his hands on the edge of a metal cart. He didn't look overwhelmed, but there was a weight in his posture, something thoughtful brewing beneath the surface. Wesley leaned against the counter, arms crossed. The silence between them stretched for a moment before he finally spoke. You thinking about walking away from this? Wyatt shook his head. Not a chance. Wesley nodded, unsurprised. Good. There was a pause before Wyatt looked over, his expression sharp but not accusatory. You really own this place. Every location, Wesley confirmed. Another beat of silence. Wyatt turned the thought over in his head before speaking again. So why'd you wait until now to see what was happening? Wesley didn't flinch at the question. He respected it. I trusted the wrong people to run things, he admitted. Figured if the numbers looked good, everything else was fine. Wyatt processed that, then nodded slowly. Yeah. Well, the numbers looked good because Rick was squeezing every penny out of people whether they needed the work or not. Wesley had already pieced that together. And nobody said anything? People need their jobs, Wyatt said simply. Most of the guys here, they've got families' bills. You start calling out management, next thing you know, your hours get cut, or you're stuck on the worst jobs until you quit on your own. Wesley absorbed that without argument. He had spent a career making decisions from a distance, trusting reports over reality. That distance had allowed people like Rick to thrive. It was a mistake he wouldn't make again. You ever run a shop before? Wesley asked. Wyatt shook his head. No, but I know how things should be run. Wesley pushed off the counter. That's a start. You're not going to be in this alone. You'll have the support you need, and I'll be around a lot more than I used to be. Wyatt studied him like he was measuring whether Wesley meant it. After a moment, he seemed to come to a decision. Then I'm in. Wesley extended a hand. Wyatt hesitated for half a second before clasping it, sealing the shift that had started hours ago. As they stepped outside, the night air carried the sound of distant traffic. The garage stood behind them, quiet now but different. Wyatt locked the door, pocketing the keys. He still looked like the same mechanic who had started his shift that morning, but something was different now. Wesley recognized it, the weight of responsibility. The understanding that from this moment forward, things would be different not just for Wyatt, but for every employee who had been stuck under the wrong kind of leadership. Wesley had come in expecting to find problems. He hadn't expected to find the solution standing in the middle of his shop, covered in grease, doing the right thing when nobody was watching. As they parted ways, Wesley knew one thing for certain: this wasn't going to be the last time he walked into one of his shops unannounced. Because today had proved something he couldn't ignore. Distance had made him blind, and he wasn't about to let that happen again. The next morning, Wyatt arrived at the shop earlier than usual. The place felt different now, like the air itself carried the weight of change. He had spent most of the night turning things over in his head, running through every possible outcome of what had happened the day before. Wesley was already there, standing outside with a clipboard. Wyatt approached, pulling his jacket tighter against the early morning chill. He was still adjusting to the idea that the guy he had assumed was just another worker was actually the owner of the entire business. Wesley glanced up from the clipboard. You sleep at all? Not really, Wyatt admitted. Wesley nodded like he understood. Figured. Lot happened yesterday. Wyatt shoved his hands into his pockets. So what now? Wesley tapped the clipboard. Now we fix things. I've been going through the numbers. The way Rick was running this place, we should have had a lot more complaints than what actually made it to corporate. Wyatt wasn't surprised. Most people just take the hit and move on. Nobody wants to deal with the hassle of reporting things if they think nothing's gonna change. That's the problem, Wesley said. I'm not just looking at this shop, I've got 5 more just like it, and I need to know how deep this goes. Wyatt considered that. You think the other managers are the same way? I don't know yet, Wesley admitted, but I don't plan on waiting to find out the hard way. Wyatt nodded, understanding the weight of what Wesley was saying. One bad manager was a problem. A system that allowed bad management to thrive was something else entirely. Wesley flipped the clipboard around and handed it to Wyatt. Take a look at this. Wyatt scanned the page. It was a breakdown of the shop's recent service orders, side by side with parts inventory and what had actually been used. Even with just a quick glance, he could see the discrepancies. He let out a slow breath. They were charging people for work that never got done. Wesley's expression didn't change, but his grip on the clipboard tightened. Looks that way. Wyatt handed the clipboard back. So what do? We start by making it right, Wesley said. I'm pulling records for every questionable service order from the last 6 months. If people paid for work they didn't get, they're getting their money back. Wyatt exhaled sharply. That's gonna cost a fortune. It's the cost of doing the right thing, Wesley said. And I'd rather take the hit now than let this place keep running like a scam. Wyatt respected that. He had dealt with enough bosses who only cared about the bottom line. Seeing someone actually willing to own up to the damage and fix it, that wasn't something he had expected. The first mechanics started arriving, throwing curious glances their way. The news about Rick's firing had spread fast, and everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Wesley didn't waste time. As soon as the full team was there, he called them together. He kept it short and to the point. Rick was gone. Things were going to change. If anyone had been pressured into dishonest practices, now was the time to come clean. No punishments if they spoke up, only if they kept trying to play the same game. Most of the mechanics looked relieved. A few looked nervous, but nobody argued. When the meeting broke up, Wyatt found himself standing beside Wesley again. "You think they'll actually speak up?" Wyatt asked. "Some will," Wesley said. "The rest will wait and see if we mean it." Wyatt glanced at the clipboard in Wesley's hand. "And do we?" Wesley met his gaze. "Yeah, we do." Wyatt nodded, rolling his shoulders like he was settling into the weight of it. "All right then," he said. "Let's get to work."